Now, the first step to understanding the impact of your podcast interviews is knowing your goals. And without a clear call to action that aligns with your goal, your guest appearance could be just a wasted opportunity. For example, if you've just published a new book, your goal will be getting listeners to buy your book. If you're running a Kickstarter campaign, your focus will be on encouraging listeners to pledge their support, right? If you're building brand awareness or improving brand sentiment, you might want listeners to tag you on social media. It's important to remember that to get a holistic understanding of your interview's impact, it's probably worth tracking more than just one metric. But what sort of things can you be tracking? It kind of goes without saying that you'll want to know how many people have listened to your interview. So about a week after the episode goes live, ask the host for streaming and download numbers. Just make sure you've done your bit and promoted the episode before you ask them, right? It's also worth asking about retention rates. There's a big difference between someone who listened for 10 seconds and someone who listened all the way to the end of the episode. If you ask the host to send you the retention curve, you can see if there was a certain moment that listeners kind of dropped off, lost interest. Here's an example from Spotify of what the host might send you. You can see that there's a pretty rapid drop off during the intro, which is pretty normal. Listeners tend to drop off here, but it can vary depending on the intro length and how engaging it is, etc., right? Then there are no major drop offs until near the end of the episode that you see there. Again, it's normal for listeners to drop off as the episode starts to wrap up. So, don't worry too much about that if you're seeing that in the chart that you get sent. The graph the host sends you might look pretty different to this, so it's then up to you to read into the data and see what nuggets and insights you can find. Next on my list is all about how you can track new leads, customers, or purchases. One way you can do this is by setting up unique discount codes for your interviews. You often hear these sorts of codes mentioned in podcast ads, but you can do this for guest appearances too. Just remember to discuss your call to action with the host prior to recording, just to make sure that it works for the both of you. Next up, now you can easily make discount codes in e-commerce stores like Shopify or WooCommerce, and in some payment processors like Stripe. Here's a YouTube screenshot of how you can set up a discount code in Shopify. It's really pretty easy. You just give it a name, create the code, and add the discount details. If you don't have a payment platform set up, you can track discounts manually. Just make up a code and get listeners to mention it when they contact you via email or phone, and keep an eye on how many people use the code in the days or weeks after your episode is released. Maybe noting them in a spreadsheet or however you track things, right? If your business is all about lead generation, you can also track lead source the old-fashioned way just by asking them how they heard about you and heard about your business. You can do this over the phone or as a multiple choice, either embedded in an email or in your app during the onboarding process, for example. Another way of tracking leads and sales is by using a memorable link in combination with a UTM tracking link. Just set up a redirect from a short link like mybusiness.com/podcast offer to a tracking link that contains the source, medium, and the campaign. Here's an example of a tracking link you might want to create with podcast as the source, guest appearance as the medium, and the podcast name and offer as the campaign. Mention the link during your interview and ask the podcast host to use it in the show notes, then track the number of leads or customers in your CRM platform that come from this specific link. This leads me on nicely to checking your website stats. You can also use the tracking links we just talked about to see how many people visit your website. Just use an analytics tool like Google Analytics and navigate to traffic sources, campaign. If you're not using a tracking link, you could see if the number of unique visitors to your website spikes in the days after your guest episode is released. You can do this with an analytics tools or even just on your website dashboard if you're using something like Wix, for example. Here is a specific example of the traffic overview page on Wix. You can look at site sessions and unique visitors to see if there are any spikes. And you can even compare the stats from the week after the episode was released to the week before the episode was released. You could even create a landing page specifically for your podcast appearance. Mention the landing page URL during the episode and in the show notes if you can, but nowhere else. This means you should stop it from being indexed on Google or being reached via a button on your website, and you'll know that all the traffic is coming from that one source. Then, when you check your website traffic in the week or so after the episode is released and see how many visitors you get to this page, you'll be pretty confident that they're people from listening to that episode that you were featured on. It's also worth counting the number of backlinks you get from your podcast appearances, because acquiring high quality backlinks will help you rank higher in search engines like Google and Bing. You can do this in a tool like SEMrush if you already have a subscription, or you can enter your domain into Ahrefs' free backlink checker, and it will list all of the backlinks that it has. So here's an example of using Ahrefs' backlink checker on Alex Hormozi's site. You just copy paste your domain URL, and then it gives a list of the backlinks. You then scroll down to see if any of these referring pages are from podcasts. Easy. Now, if you appear on podcasts for PR purposes, it might be useful to look at certain social media metrics. You can use a social media monitoring tool like Mention or Brand24 to track mentions of your brand, book, product, or even your name. Here's an example of Brand24 showing a graph with daily mentions. If you're doing what we call a podcast tour, right, which means lots of podcast interviews in a short space of time, you're more likely to create a buzz than if you do it sporadically. So it's more likely that you'll see this graph spike. Another metric to monitor is the number of followers you or your brand have. You can use a social tool like Hootsuite or Sprout Social to track followers across your social media accounts, or just, manually check how many followers you have just before each episode goes live and how many you have afterwards, and then calculate the difference. Here's what you'll see on Instagram if you have a business or creator account. You can see your current number of followers as well as change in followers over a specific period of time. If developing thought leadership is your goal, then your best metrics might be increased recognition in your industry or niche. For example, are people approaching you at conferences or inviting you to speak? Are podcast hosts reaching out to you for interviews? Are industry leaders commenting on your social posts? These are all things that you can measure and gauge as you go. You can keep track of these manually in a spreadsheet and then compare figures month to month. Finally, a bonus tip. No matter what your goals are regarding podcast interviews, gathering your audience's perspective can give you valuable qualitative insights. Read comments and reviews to get feedback from the show's audience on the information you gave and how effective your key messages were. You might notice phrases like great podcast guest, valuable information, unique insights, and thought leader. These positive reviews will boost your confidence and show you that you're on the right track. And it just makes you feel good. For example, here are some YouTube comments for Dave Pascoe's interview on the Ben Greenfield Life podcast. The comments are generally positive, and you can pick out some bits, like someone referred to Dave as, a teacher. Someone else said, "I love your honesty." So you're able to identify what exactly people like about you, and maybe you can lean into that further. That's a cue they should follow. Negative comments or reviews can be constructive too, because they can highlight areas for improvement or ways that you went off track. Reading them might encourage you to improve your storytelling techniques, offer more valuable content, or even change your talking points. That's all from me today. Let me know in the comments how you decide to measure the impact of your guest appearances. If you're looking to find more suitable podcasts to pitch as a guest, remember you can give Raphonic a go for free. We've got almost 3 million shows on there with a load of data like listener numbers, social reach, contact information, and lots of other valuable stuff. So just check out the link in the description, and we'll see you next time.